Cards and Comic Show.
Hey, welcome back to Cards and Comics. Today I'm going to be talking to Theo, Clemente card collector, and we're going to talk about player collecting. We both collect the same player, which is really cool, but we do it in different ways. And there's not one way to collect a player. There's not one way to collect, and this will be a fun conversation with two people who are very passionate about collecting Roberto Clemente, and how we both approached it in our and how we collect, and talk about the price value equation, what's in and out of your collection, and what cards speak to you in terms of when you look at your collection and what cards kind of pop out to you. So, bring in Theo right now.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. This is awesome.
Hey, you are the third person ever to appear on my channel, so I don't know if that's an honor or something that maybe not so much of an honor, but I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, I'm like I said, you came on my channel, so if nobody has seen that, maybe go check it out. We talk more about grading instead of collecting. But I met you at the National last year, which was awesome. But I watched you from afar prior to the National, so it's always fun to meet another Clemente collector. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, what's funny to me is, I would say just to start off with is like I'm weirdly private in collecting worlds. Like I don't, YouTube was kind of my real venture into like telling people about how I collect and what I collect. But I spent years just collecting, without anyone really knowing what I collected. And so it's really cool to see like you're out there talking to a lot of Clemente collectors, a lot of people in the hobby. And you'll probably know that a lot of them don't even know who I am or don't even know about my collection because I've just always been a private guy. And I had, my biggest thing was probably having some registry sets on PSA. So it's just kind of fun to see like different approaches there, you've been very active in the Clemente community. I think that's really awesome. I'm just kind of getting started there a little bit, and I'm still a little bit of an unknown commodity in that world, which is fine. Same thing for me in the Griffey world too. I went into Griffey collecting. There was a hardcore community established, and when you break into it, it's kind of like you're the new guy, even though you may have been doing it for 20 years, right? You're still the new guy.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
I just love the friendships on here, and I'm close to Clemente collectors, but I'm also close to other YouTubers. I just it's kind of like I want to compare it to college experience. If anybody ever went through that, like freshman year, you get in your dorms and you end up being like best friends with like your freshman friends, like the whole college experience, and it's like, well, how did that happen? And it's like we kind of experienced it together kind of thing. And it's kind of the same as I've connected with a lot of guys that are pretty new to YouTube and like kind of came in around the pandemic, a lot of them. And it kind of like we relate to each other as far as our collecting journeys and stuff like that. But I'm really enjoying meeting some of the more established collectors out there and some of the more established YouTubers out there. And it's been a lot of fun because that's really how we're going to learn is sharing,
Well, and I think the thing that's really important too about Clemente is that he has a lot of interesting cards and a lot of say esoteric or really interesting cards that if you just go surface deep, it appears like he's got just a basic kind of thing to collect, and then you get really deep into it and you find there's a lot of cool stuff out there that's somewhat hidden unless you really know what you're looking for, especially on what's rare. And I think you covered that pretty well. I'm obviously, like I started out with the base set, and then kind of branched out a little bit from that. But I really appreciate like you're very deep already into Clemente and some of the really interesting cards that he has that aren't quite as popular or well known. So let's start there. Like, So how do you determine what's in and out of your collection? Like where do you draw the line? Like this card is something I would collect, or this something is something I won't collect?
That's a great question. So this is where we're kind of different. I like everything Clemente. The line I drew at the beginning was I wanted only playing days Clemente cards and Clemente items. Just because I feel like modern just has gotten that so out of control. I wanted to draw a line because I do have a hobby budget and I just can't buy everything. So that was the line I drew. But as far as out of my collection, there's really no such thing. The only time something goes out of my collection is and I don't like this word, but upgrade, because like, for example, I bought a Canadian Post serial card and it looked like maybe a dog chewed on it. But I just thought it was such a great deal at the time and I just didn't have one. So I bought it. And then I saw one recently and I ended up, you could say, upgrading. So now I'm willing to sell the one that looks like a dog chewed up. But like I'll just show you kind of how crazy. Like I saw this on eBay, Clemente Iron City 6-pack, and when they were building the Clemente statue, they actually put him on 6 different cans to try to raise money for it. And like I just broke my own rule of only buying playing days. I just thought this was so unique, and I think I only paid about $25, and they're full cans. So it's a small example of something I bought playing days, but hopefully I answered your question. Pretty much,
Yeah.
98% of everything I have is from his time playing.
Right.
So.
No, and that was sort of like my first rule was always playing days only, because to your point, when you get post playing days, it just becomes a proliferation of cards and it becomes hard to navigate. But I break my own rules too, because I sometimes I'll buy a game used card or something like or like I would always love to own like a cut autograph that was put in a pack or something like that. So I would violate that rule for something that cool like that. But
Yeah.
I generally stick to that. But I also, when I first started Clemente collecting, it was really just about the base cards. Like it was about like the 1955 through 73 run and getting everything in a certain grade. That was my focus when I first started. And I know you're not as grade specific. And I think for me, that was helped and hurt me, because and I'll tell you, like, the reason why I stuck to certain grades is because it was really when I talked to dealers, it became hard to, like, if I had, let's say I wanted to get a 62 Mantle, or sorry, 62 Clemente,
Yeah.
and I wanted to trade 3 or 4 of my other Clementes for it. If they weren't in a certain condition or grade, that deal became very hard to make. And I learned that really early on in my journey was dealers, for the most part, which owned all the cards, wouldn't talk to you unless you had certain, it was a very hard transaction unless it was in certain condition. And that really kind of led me to just say, look, I need to collect in this certain range, or it's going to be hard to upgrade or turn that collection around. And so that's sort of my mindset. But I think that probably not the mindset that I would probably do again. If I went into it again, I probably would be a little different.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting, like, you're kind of the more of a path that's more traditional, I would say. Most player collectors, I'm not saying super collectors, I'm saying player collectors. Most player collectors, I'm going to get the base set, I'm going to get the best grade possible, maybe collector's grade of the year, the grade kind of thing. And I think it's funny though, because your thought process is, where do you, what do you don't buy like an ugly looking Clemente card, right? Like, but you just said I buy every single base card. So you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, I'm saying I collect every Clemente card, and you're saying you collect every base Clemente. So bottom line is we both are doing a checklist. Mine's longer, but I would argue too, Clemente doesn't have very, very many things that don't look cool.
Yeah.
So he's one player that kind of breaks that rule anyways. But
yeah. Well, no, and I think that's the thing is like, and we'll talk about in a minute about, kind of cards that just speak to you and things that make you want to collect them. But yeah, when you're, like we're always on budgets, right? I mean, you know, unless you're some kind of crazy independently wealthy person, it's like you kind of look at it like, you know, like here's what I can afford. And
Right.
things were more affordable, I think, back in 1997, 98 when I was really starting the journey with graded cards. Before then, I was completely raw. And I think that's sort of as the things, you know, as things change, you know, like I know I would not be able to afford some of the cards I actually have in my collection today, or at least I would have a lot harder time getting some of the cards. So I was probably lucky in some cases to get early, but you know, it does create, it's a two-edged sword because every card you need from then on becomes harder and harder to get.
Yeah.
You know, and like you saw with my 68 3D Clemente, you know, what I had to give up to get that card was pretty significant from a financial perspective, but that's what you kind of have to do. And I was, you know, I was happy to do it, but it just says like to get that one card I needed or really wanted, that was a pretty big investment, and you know, and it was hard. And I think as you get closer to your kind of grails, do you feel the same way? Like it's going to be harder and harder to get those cards?
I do. And you know, that's kind of the downfall of what I've been doing is as the list gets shorter, it tends to get more expensive, even non-grade dependent. And what I've been doing is I've been getting less cards with my budget, and I've been trying to, you know, build up some budget. And a lot of times I'll do like a grading reveal, and like 3 of the cards are over $100, which is a lot for me. So I think as far as like the I've never got caught up on I need this card in this grade, this card in that grade. Of obviously to each their own. And I've actually heard some flack from some people in the community every once in a while, like, oh, if you were smart, you would save up and just do all 8s or 7s or 6s because that's where the money is. But I guess I've always been the type of and I think anybody can relate to this, is if somebody was buying a Playing Days Babe Ruth and they only bought PSA 8s, they'd be willing to get a PSA 2 or a PSA 1. And I'm kind of similar of if there's a scarce Clemente card out there, like I like 4s and 5s usually. That's kind of the range that I like as far as the condition of the cards. Well, if there's a bazooka that's only 100 graded or under 100 graded, and there's a 2, I'm happy to own it. So I think it's very hard to have hard and fast rules, especially when you start getting off the track of base cards. You really have to be willing to maybe lower your standards and just enjoy the history of the card more, in my opinion, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I've been on that journey a little bit too, where I've started to enjoy lower graded cards. I mean, like I started collecting Chief Bender, and you know, pre-war you're just not going to collect 8s. It's just not going to happen. So seeing a really nicely centered and visually appealing 2 and 3 and a 4, when you can enjoy those cards, you know, it's made me re-look at my Clemente collection to say, yeah, for like a bazooka or something that's really rare and hard to find, you know, 3s, 4s, and 5s might be okay, because that's just what the grades, that's what they are. Like that's a high end for that card, or that's a good grade for that card, right?
Exactly.
So let's talk about the value equation. Like, you know, because I find your channel really interesting because you do these videos where you kind of look at wins and losses. Like, did I, you know, by buying the card raw and grading it, was I able to come under, you know, like, you know, budget, or was I able to kind of spread my money out further by doing it? And I feel like that's a really interesting, and I think a lot of collectors can relate to that, because you know, you want to be able to spread your dollars as much as possible, and that's everyone, you know, wants to do that. But you're doing it in a way where you're really trying to track it and hold yourself kind of like, did it work, did it not work, you know? And I find that a really interesting part of your channel. Like, how do you look at your value equation? Like, what makes you pull a trigger on a card?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I thank you for the you know, the nice words about it. I do since my budget is, you know, smaller compared to some, and I mean, I'm not going to complain. I'm happy with my collection, but yeah, like some of these cards, like I guess I'll use like the, let me see here, the bazooka card I just got recently. So I just got this at the Strongsville show, and another example of, as you said, as cards get more expensive, how can I maybe afford some of them is the National in Strongsville. I try to save up and try to get bigger cards on, like, this is a bigger card for me. Like the National, I might get like a $500 to $600 card, but that's kind of an also strategy for me is maybe banking up some money for the card shows. But whenever I was looking at this at the show, these food issue cards, you really have to, they're hand cut, so you have to look at the dashes around the outside. And I know I'm not educating you, I'm just trying to, if somebody's watching, so you really have to look at the dashes. So when I'm looking at the card at the show, and I would recommend these food issue cards are better to look at a show if possible. eBay photos isn't the best place to look. I'm on my phone. I have VCP. I think it's money well spent to get VCP.
Right.
And I'm looking at an authentic sale first, because I'm going to always assume that this card's authentic, even if it has all the dashes. You never know, to be honest with, like, that's just my personal opinion. You really don't know what SGC is going to give you. So that was my baseline authentic. And then I thought at max it could get a 3, which it did end up getting. So I went into the negotiation with the dealer based off of, I'm going to show him the authentic price, and I'm going to talk to him about how there's some dashes missing over here, and I'm going to try to work him down because he had $300 raw on this card, and the authentic sold for $200. Like, but it was an authentic that sold a year ago. There's only been two of these sold in the last year. So it tells you how they don't come up often, right?
Oh yeah.
So I'm like, I'll work with you. I try to get him down to 300. He said he bought it for 300. We ended up settling on 325. And I knew that a 3 sold for, what did it sell for? Wait 1 second. Okay. He wanted 300 for it. I worked him down to 225. A 3 recently sold for 330. So I paid $25 over authentic. But I felt it was worth it because this card never comes up.
Yeah.
Now my risk in my head is the worst case scenario. I love the look of the card. Worst case scenario, I paid $25 more than the last authentic sale. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it's all about comps, and the food issue stuff. There's less comps to go off of, but at least you have a baseline of where you might feel comfortable. And like I said, my rule of thumb is always do worst case scenario, and then if it's really a card you never see very often, you might just have to pull the trigger, right? So
yeah, no, that's exactly right. I mean, to me, I've said it a few times as, take what you think the card's going to grade and subtract 1 grade if you're going to buy raw. So if you think it's a 6, buy it at a 5. If you think it's a 4, buy it at a 3, because that's really your hedge to try to really prevent big losses, because again, no one wants to go in and just throw money away for no reason.
Exactly.
The other thing I think it's interesting too is like, would you ever, on some of these kind of cards, like the postcards or the Jello cards or Milk Duds, want to have with and without the entire box?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me show you an example of something I do have, and then I'll speak to that. So here's a stamp album from 1969, Pirates, right? And literally, there's a kid who put every stamp in for the Pirates that year, right? So this is the downfall to me of us as collectors. As I think PSA Registry screwed us a little bit on this. Like, so you're telling me that this cost me $10, okay? Here's an authentic stamp panel that has Clemente on it, authentic from SGC. This was $35.
Right.
$10, 35. This is in its purest form. Collecting, a kid collected this. This is just cut off of a sheet. Granted, it's still from 1969. I'm not saying that, but that's where I sometimes have a hard time. And I'll show you one more example. Here's the Dell stamp book from 1971. and this is a really cool one because it's the All-Star edition. Clemente's on a page there with Hank Aaron. I got this last year at the National for $30. The
Yeah,
Hank
that's really cool.
Aaron, I mean, the Clemente sells for about $30 raw,
Yeah,
unrated. So like I don't plan on buying the individual Clemente card for this. I'm gonna buy a slab Clemente card when I have the book. Like this
right,
thing makes 0 cents, and there's no SGC registry. It's not like
right,
I'm not competing against anybody. But
right.
to go back to your question, if I found a full bazooka box and I didn't have the individual card and I bought it, I would be happy. I would just have the bazooka box. I would never buy the individual card.
Right.
The problem is bazooka boxes are so expensive. Milk Dud box for Clemente, you're looking about over $1,000.
Yeah.
So I'm at the National. I'm going to actually try to get a cutout Milk Dud of Clemente, just the card itself, just because it's more in my price range. But
Yeah.
does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, I think it just shows you though, like, I mean, I think that as a collector, you said it earlier, is you can't really have hard and fast rules because things happen in your personal life and in collecting to make things, certain sets can go way up in value, and what you thought you could do 2 years ago, you can't do anymore in terms of value, in terms of what you can collect. And then also, like, something might come up, and this is a question I was going to give you is, because this is a true story for me. This happened to me multiple times. Is there any card that you would go out there today and just say, I'm going to wipe out my entire collection to trade for or buy this one card? Because
No.
it's such a hard card to get, or such a big card that I would, give up my entire collection just to have this one card.
See, that's where, to me, that's where it's kind of like this whole journey that I've been on collecting Clementes.
Mm-hmm.
I almost have a story every single card I have. I mean, 3 of these cards were from my dad. That's where it all started.
Yeah.
And then like I got my O-Pee-Chee Clemente 71. This is my O-Pee-Chee Grail card right here. I got this for Christmas. My family gave me $250 in gift cards, and I got this for Christmas. Every card has different stories. I would have a hard time picking 10 cards I had no attachment to sell. My dream card's a Clemente 3D, right? The card you got last year. But in my collection is not worth the value of a Clemente 3D. I don't think I could do it. I just couldn't. Like the emotional value and connection I have per card is too high. You know what I'm saying? Like I know that sounds crazy.
It's a great answer. It's a great answer because, just to give you an idea, for me, there were times when I was, because I was in high school and college when I first started collecting Clemente.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I'd have like the 68, the 69, the 70, the 72, the 73, and like 7s or 8s. And then I go to a show and there would be like a 65 or 64. And so then I would just sell or trade all those later year Clementes to get that 64 or 65. And then I would buy back slowly those other cards because they were cheaper and affordable. And then I would do it again to get the 62 or 63. And so it's like I started building up my collection. Then at one point, I did that same thing to get my 55 Clemente rookie. I was at a show. My first rookie came from Mile High Sports Cards. He had just bought it. The owner of Mile High just bought it. He showed it to me, and he said, "I'm going to put this in the auction." I said, "I would love to have that card from you." And he's like, "I don't know. I didn't want to sell it. He really wanted to auction it, and I got him to give me a price." And so I had my box of cards with me, which had a lot of my Clemente collection, and I ended up selling most of it to get that first 55 rookie, and it was a PSA 7. And it's just like, and I see that point, and it's just so funny because I didn't hesitate. I was like, that's the card I want. That's his rookie card. It's in the grade I really think is the one I want to get. And so like I really, I've recycled my collection like probably at least 3 or 4 times to get some of the cards I have in the grades they're in. So it just shows you like it's way two different approaches, right?
Yeah.
Like you're collecting both cards and memories. I was, trying to get certain cards. I call it like locked in. Like I need
Yeah.
a 7 or an 8. I need to lock that card in because to get that condition is hard, and that was really what I was shooting for. Then later on, there was a period of time when it was a little easier for me. I was making a little bit more money. I could afford to get other cards. I didn't really need to sell everything to be able to buy something.
Right.
But it was a journey, and I think my collection probably again recycled 2 or 3 times before I kind of ended with the cards I own today. And but it's just interesting to see a different collector's journey because I think it's both valid. I think your cards have a little bit more soul to them than probably what mine do in terms of like how they came to be and how they started because and you've graded a lot of your cards. You yourself have graded the cards. Like locked them into your collection through a lot of say blood, sweat, and tears to get to get them, find them, grade them,
Right.
make sure that your value equation that you were looking for made sense. For me, like a lot of my collection came again as I was hustling at card shows and trading them and trading up. Like that whole idea of trading up
Right.
to get a bigger card. But in some cases, like I just fell into things. Like my 58 Clemente is an 8.5,
Nice.
and that card was sitting on eBay for years, and finally I made an offer on it, and the guy took it, and it was well before pandemic and all that, and it's just like I don't know, like if I don't know I could ever afford that card again. It just happened to be in that weird time period where cards were kind of on a wall. 8.5s weren't that popular of a grade, and the guy was like, I'll give it to you for this, and we worked out a deal, and that kind of like, yeah, okay, well that worked out pretty good for me in the long run, but it wasn't like I went to a show, found a raw card, got it graded, it came back an 8.5. I have a few Clementes in my collection I graded. My 73.9 was a card that I graded myself. My 68, one of my 68s that is in my collection, I graded myself. I'm trying to think. It's not the base card. It's the I want to say the manager's dream card.
Oh, okay. With the 3 of them on it.
Yeah.
68, right?
So there's some cards like that. But it's just sort of like there is a crossover there a little bit with some grading, but it's interesting to see like how everybody has this different approach. And to your point, my approach was very classical. It's sort of like what the registry guys were doing.
Yeah.
And I was following along sort of because I was on the PSA forums and the boards, and we were all kind of set collecting together and player collecting together. And that was sort of how you did it. You were trying to get the highest grade for the cards you were collecting. Yeah. And I had a very limited focus of just, not getting all the odd cards, but, or more oddball cards. But it's just interesting. So we mentioned oddball cards. So, when you look at cards in your collection, like what cards like speak to you the most? Like what make you like when you saw it for the first time, you said, I got to go get that card because that card is so cool.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about it. So my big pickup at the National last year, and I think I showed it to you at the National. If I didn't, I'm surprised, but is the Manny's Baseball Land.
Oh, wow.
So Howard Chasser, who's number 2 on the PSA registry, he bought a huge Clemente collection. Already had this in a PSA 4, so he's willing to sell it. And I was like, do not put that out at the National. Like this was my second. I got the stand up last year. That was my biggest purchase, but this was the second biggest purchase. And I just love this image of Clemente.
Yeah, it's so good.
It graded a 2. I have no clue why. It's beautiful. It's got no marks on it, nothing. But it's an image of Clemente. I think that's only seen on this photo. So that's an example of I just saw it and I was like, I have to have that. And most guys would be like, well, it's not a card. It's not a card size. It's not a card. Like, but to me, I'm just like, that's a part of history. And I think that's one thing that me personally, like when I have somebody come over my house that doesn't, that's not into baseball cards, that doesn't know. My big thing is like the history of Topps, the history of baseball in the '60s, baseball cards in the '60s, and food issue cards in the '60s. That's what gets me excited. I'm like, well, I know you eaten post cereal before. Well, here's the 61, 62, and 63 post cereal card. I know you probably chewed gum. Here's bazooka cards that were on. It's like the history of the '60s is so freaking cool to me, and by being a player collector like I am, I'm able to see just a snapshot, and I understand some of the regional stuff. Like obviously Clemente has cons, but then some of the players in other areas have other regional stuff that I'm not able to see as much. But this card spoke to me a lot. It's a Pro Star, 1972. They weren't allowed to use the logos because they didn't have the license on there. But this is kind of like postcard size, but it was printed in Canada. And I just think this is freaking cool. He's just on the on deck circle waiting to go bat. I just love that. And the one other thing I love is I love posters. The poster behind me here, the poster above. I still have a couple Clemente posters I really, really want. I don't think the collectors on YouTube appreciate Topps posters enough. They're freaking cool. Yeah. They just are. They're freaking cool.
They are cool. No, I think that's and what's cool about it too is like you're not stuck on the card format. Like if it's cool, you want it. For me, like here's an example of a non-card, but it's kind of card-like. But this card one, I didn't know existed. A friend of mine, Joe Woods collector, started channel. He was with us at the National.
Yep.
He showed this to me, and then I saw him. I got to have this. It is the All-Star sticker Clemente.
Yeah,
and to me, when I saw that image on that card, I was like, I got to have that. That's one of the coolest. I just love that full batting pose image because that's one thing with Clemente. You don't see a lot of cards where he's doing that kind of full batting pose.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was a cool image, Clemente. It's another thing too, that you don't see a lot of images of Clemente making a catch. Which is the thing that he was really good at was catching and throwing. You don't see that very often on cards either. But this card to me, like I just love that image of him, that kind of like portrait of him batting. And just I love the purple here. Just a great, obviously these came in 3 sheets of 3, so this is incorporated to 5. So again, going back to that whole idea of like I don't need to have 7s, 8s, and 9s for every one of my cards. I was very happy to get a 5. And I think it's still pretty rare to get a card that even to find this card is pretty tough. But a 5 is a good grade for this card.
Yeah, and it's a Topps test issue. So yeah, like once again, the history of Topps, like Topps was trying everything in the '60s. Like I have coins here. Topps had Topps coins. I mean, I know a lot of people know about them out there, but just saying they were trying everything they could. They had games with the cards. They were trying to be so creative to try to captivate the children out there to try to be interested in cards and baseball.
I'm trying to remember. Is there a 61 dice game, Clemente?
I don't think there is. No,
there is.
I don't believe so.
No, like it's so funny because like I'll ask this question in a second because like another one of my favorites. I know it's one of your favorites too. Is a stand up.
Yeah,
you got yours too. So it's like and I've had mine for a while. So it's one of those like got it early when it was cheap, and then on your side of it, O-Pee-Chee, I do have a 70 and a 71. I'm missing the 69. I used to own it.
Really?
And somehow I traded it or sold it or something. But I've got this in an 8, the 71's a 6, and then I own the 65 and a 7. So I've got quite a few of the Peaches, but the thing that's crazy to me is that Clemente doesn't have an O-Pee-Chee every year. It's like he's hit or miss on the O-Pee-Chees, just like Venezuelans. He doesn't have a Venezuelan for every year they made Venezuelans, from what I remember or saw.
No.
So, and then one of the weirder, or kind of like, it's weird for me, this card, the 69 Super, because it's not bigger. They call it a super, but it's not bigger than the original cards because in 70 and 71 they were big cards. Like
Right.
they made kind of like a super card, but in
Yeah.
69 it was just it was a normal size card, just with rounded corners and no border. So to me, it's like yeah.
There's that one. Oh, this is a poster.
Yeah. There's a 71. Yeah.
Yep.
So it's just funny to me in 69, it's a normal size card. But again, like I said, that's for me, like those cards are odd. Like in my collection, you don't see that as many of those kind of cards. Now I do have a lot of the postcards. Of Clemente, I do have a few years of his postcards collected. Obviously, the year I paid the most attention to was 61. Because I collected the Pirate team set in 61. I have almost the entire Pirate postcard set in 61, as well as the Cons 61 set.
That's awesome.
So I collect a lot of the 61s because that's sort of where I really first started. I collected the 61 Pirates before I collected Clemente.
That's awesome. It's the best World Series in baseball history.
Oh yeah, and have you seen the re-released footage of the Game 7?
No.
I believe NBC or one of the channels found. I believe it was a pretty famous singer from Pittsburgh. It's not Frank Sinatra. It was someone else who had a recording made so he could watch it, and then that recording they found, and it's like almost pristine of that Game 7, and they remastered it and re-released it on MLB.com or MLB Network. Re-released it. I believe you can buy the DVD now, but it's basically they found Game 7, and because like a lot of the old World Series, there's not a lot of footage from that game, and they found like basically a pristine copy of that footage, and they remastered it, and they actually first showed it on MLB Network. I thought that's pretty cool. I think they did it on the anniversary, and it's one of those things. But so I know we talked about like kind of like some of the things we want to talk about. The last thing I want to talk to you about is Clemente didn't have cards in every year. For every year that they made cards, he wasn't in every set, or he wasn't like, for example, in 58 Hires Root Beer. So of the sets that he wasn't in, which sets do you wish he was in that he's not?
Okay, and it's cool because I my second PC is Dick Grote, and I also do some Sam Usual PC on the side a little bit. And the first thing I wanted to get for Dick Grote was the Hires Root Beer. So I like I just said, I love the history. So now I have a card to represent that. So I would say Red Man would have been super cool. Like this is one of my favorite Bazooka Clemente cards. Like you said, he doesn't have a lot of cards throwing. Like just to have him throwing on one of those Red Man cards would have been super cool. I think so. I agree. Hires would have been a lot of fun. It seems like Maze and Aaron were pretty much got all the good sets like that. I love the regional set Spick and Span, especially the die cut ones with Hank Aaron and Warren Spahn. That would have been freaking cool to have Clemente on a die cut card like that.
Yeah, or like the swell meets, like the kind of like the build your own card or build your own player card. You had all the die cuts you had to pop out.
Yeah, that would have been really cool.
Yeah, I don't like. So I'm trying to think. Like, is Clemente on the 58 Bazooka?
58 Bazooka. I think. I'm trying to remember now.
Yeah, because I'm like,
no,
I know the panel was really cool.
No, the first Bazooka year 60. This is his first one. Yep. But actually, I think 59 Bazooka is the coolest Bazooka set. The full size image.
Yes, the full
59.
size. Yeah.
Yeah, that's 59.
59. Okay.
Yeah, that's my favorite Bazooka year, and it would have been cool because it was a full size card. Yeah, that would have been cool. Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree with that.
Yeah, I know the Hires Root Beer card would have been just epic for Clemente, and but like all those, like he wasn't in the 61 dice test, the marble set, like there's just certain things he wasn't in, and you kind of wish like he was in all those kind of oddball sets, that Topps had. But the one card I always say like I wish he had, that to me is the biggest miss in the history of Topps, is he didn't have a 74 tribute card.
74.
Yeah, so when he died, they didn't do a tribute card to him. They didn't do any mention of him in 74.
You
And
think it's because they released the 73 card and he was already deceased at that point, so it wasn't a tribute, but it was still it was a card after he played. Actually, it's actually a non-playing days card, which is kind of weird.
I think it's what I've always heard is that they did the Ken Hubbs card when Ken Hubbs died in that car wreck, and then I heard Topps got flack for that card because they didn't do in memorial cards for every player, and so they just said we're not going to do in memorial cards for anyone ever, because they didn't do one for Thurman Munson when he died. Yeah. So they basically said, but I also take it, but Clemente died like basically in a humanitarian way, and it felt weird that Topps didn't mention him at all, like after he died. Like there was no like tribute or any sort of mention in 74 of Clemente. So
yeah, it is interesting.
That's the only thing I wish that they would have done something, because again, the way he died and the way a whole nation mourned, and it was a really big deal. And I think that seemed like, because I know Thurman Munson was a big deal, but like, he died kind of in a plane wreck,
right?
Like in a different way. And again, I know a lot of people are going to be like, well, like if you're not going to do it for everyone, don't do it for one. But I felt like Clemente would have been that one role, because MLB put him in the Hall of Fame right away.
Right. That's the only time they broke that rule. Yep.
So to me, it's like if the MLB Hall of Fame can break their rule, and put him in the Hall of Fame immediately, Topps could have been like, yeah, we'll break this rule this one time. I don't think anyone were to complain. Like, could you imagine like the guy saying like, why did you do a Clemente tribute card, right? Like, that's not,
Yeah. Like, I never really thought about it. Like I said, I've always thought about the 73 card being released after the fact. But it is a good point. And like think about even the home run tribute card they had to Hank Aaron, and he didn't even get the home run record yet. Like they obviously cared about doing things like that. Actually, the funny thing is I actually go backwards. I think about 55 Bowman, and granted, you would have to have the contract with Bowman, but how cool! Like if he had the Bowman and the Topps, he almost had two rookie cards. Like that would have been kind of nice.
Well, I mean, it also too, like I mean, all the Bowman products that he could have had. Think about like if he just would have been a pre-rookie in 54, but I think 55 that's pretty early for him, because if you look, I think he only played like 21 games or something in 54. So, he didn't really have a lot of experience to get a rookie card, because you can remember back then, Topps really didn't care much about rookies. Like, if you played 30 games, you may have to wait till your next year, because they only had like 180 cards or 230 cards in the set. So it wasn't like they printed everyone.
Yeah, but that's the one thing that sucks though, because Mantle and Mays obviously were older than him. They had all those double years of Bowman and Topps, and it's like Clemente just missed the boat. Even Hank Aaron at least has the Bowman card. So like it's just kind of I mean, it is what it is, but it kind of like Bowman stopped being a company after 55, which kind of sucked.
Yeah, no, that's a great call out. 55 Bowman Clemente would have been epic. The early bazookas would have been epic. Hires root beer. I mean, if you think about 54, if he made it in 54, think about he could have been in Red Heart, he could have been in Bowman, he could have been in Redman. He could have had a lot of cards.
Yeah, Red Heart's a really good one. I kind of get jealous about the home run derby contest and the cool cards that came out of that. And I do understand when they were picking home run hitters at that time. Clemente wasn't exactly crushing his numbers, but I think it was Gene Alley is who they picked from the Pirates. Like, oh my gosh, like come on, like I feel like Clemente would have had a lot better showing than him.
I'm wondering if they didn't pick him because, at the time he wasn't, he wasn't a good English speaker, or at
Mm,
least according to the press.
that's a good
Um,
point.
I'm wondering if they just felt like, oh well, he wasn't going to sound good on TV, kind of thing. Because if you think about it, like at that time, yeah, because in '69, did they have Don Clendenin still, or was
Oh,
he?
was it Don Clendenin that they did for the home run derby?
Because I'm wondering,
Maybe
like, because he would have been one of the bigger home run hitters at the time. But like, but
you
'69
might
was
be right.
weird. They had a lot of transition because remember that's a lot of players are leaving from that '61 team at that time. Face was a Tiger at that time, so
Yeah,
they were like in a big transition. Friend was basically done by then, so um, it's like it's so weird to think about the Pirates becoming so good. Basically, when Starjo became a stud, and they got some
mhm.
pitching, it was like, okay, well now we're, but yeah, it's like very few teams like because that was think about how competitive the league was back then. They basically retooled the whole team from that '61 World Series and were super competitive in the '70s.
Yeah.
They were.
I
I mean, it took the Big Red Machine to really keep them from having more than the championships they had because like they were good,
yeah,
especially when they
actually,
got Parker in there.
I did a video about it's called Clemente Had No Robin, and I did a video about how he was the one superstar that really didn't have as good a sidekick consistently
Oh
as
yeah,
Mantle. Yeah, I did a video on it, and the results are very interesting. It's worth checking out. But I think to your point, 61, they had a pretty loaded team, pretty loaded pitching staff, obviously. And then there was that whole middle area where Clemente was kind of a star among, not the greatest
yeah, like
players. I know.
66, 65, 66, 67.
Yeah, yeah, Stargell took a while to get going.
Mhm.
He wasn't just immediately the Hall of Fame guy that people think
Oh
about.
yeah,
But when they got into Three River Stadium, it really helped Stargell with his home run numbers. The Forbes Field was just not a
yeah,
home run park, right? So,
yeah, yeah.
but the one thing I want to work on in a video is Clemente's prime was a lot longer than people realize. He had some of the best numbers for his age when he was upper 30s out
Yeah.
of any superstar. He really
No,
did.
I've looked at his numbers, and even towards the end of his career, he was putting a really strong WAR in his last
Mhm.
years. And if
Yeah.
you look at his numbers, and he was injured and he missed some time, I do think he was a young for his age, and he could have
Mhm.
played a couple more years, probably with pretty good numbers. I think he would have hit probably 3,500 to 3,700 hits total if he would have played a full career.
Yeah, and like you say, no, like 72, obviously, they didn't win that year. But I really think the 73 team would have been a great team, and in the plane crash just really derailed the whole. Obviously, it makes sense why it would. But I
Yeah,
really think, like you said, if he would have played 73 and 74,
right,
they would have been in contention with that team.
right.
It took them to bring everything back together, like with 79 to keep some of the studs and win again. So
Well, I mean, when they got Parker in there, I mean, they became super competitive. Again, you think about the Big Red Machine. I mean, you're talking about a team with had what 4 or 5 Hall of Famers on it
yep,
that they were competing against. So that's a really interesting thing to think about too. Is like that missed opportunity for them as a team. And as a Pirate fan, now we've gone what the longest in history since World Series appearances of any franchise. Kind of kind of depressing to think about that now as a Pirate fan. But
it is. It
um,
really is.
well, I really appreciate your time, and I really appreciate you coming on the channel. And I
Yeah,
know we've got a lot of good things to talk about, and I'm really excited to talk to other people in the community. And you're going to the national. It sounds like you're very fired up and have a plan for the national. I'll be there. Me and Doug, Joe Wood Collector are gonna we're gonna be roommates for a little bit
nice.
for that show. And for me, it's actually easier to drive there than it is anywhere else. So I'm going to be driving in for that one.
Yeah,
And so I'm looking forward to seeing you there. And we should all get together and hang out because I'd love to, see what everyone's picking up at the show because that's the fun thing about the national is seeing what everyone's getting and
yep,
seeing the stories and helping each other because you know I would never got that 63D Clemente if someone didn't tell me where it was, because I was still looking for it at the time. So like helping each other locate cards was always a big part of the national too. So let me know what you're looking for, and I'll help you find it.
Awesome, man. I appreciate it. It's great to have another friend out there. And like I said, hopefully we can do another collaboration in the future. Hopefully people enjoy this video. I know I had a good time. And it's always fun talking about Clemente. It never gets old for me. So
Nope, me either. All right. Well, hey, thanks for being on the channel. I'll see you next time, Theo.
all right. See you guys.
Bye.